I think we should start with the presentation now, unless there are any objections, but I think it's a good idea to slowly come into the presentation. It will not be like a very theoretical presentation anyways. It will be a more like really good practices, what to pay attention to, what are the difficulties that we face right now, especially from working from home or working in any teleworking situation, could be in a hotel or wherever. So I think that is a good idea that we take a little bit of a general look in that case. So I think we can go ahead and move towards the presentation and start with our whole workshop as such. So, teleworking and precautions. So if you're all doing teleworking anyways, or you know what teleworking is, that is great. The precautions, especially right now, are very important because a lot more people are doing teleworking, and attackers actually like to use certain situations, political situations, or the special situation we have right now, to actually get you to do things that you're not supposed to do. And that is something very, very interesting, something cool if you're an attacker, something not so cool if you are the person working from home and hoping to be in complete security. But it is important, nevertheless, to be aware and to pay attention. But the first thing I want to do before we start with all of that is I want to just take like a couple of seconds to present us, or to tell you who we are, so you understand where we come from and what our experience actually is. It takes a couple of seconds, but I think it is important so you know what we're doing. We are Security Made in Luxembourg. So securitymade.lu, you can go to the internet site or web page and look at that. We have multiple brands belonging to that Security Made in Luxembourg, and our experience is over 10 years right now. We are funded by the government and we get a certain amount of mandates. And this one, for the Cases brand, for example, that we are working right now, it actually is to provide awareness and tools for cybersecurity, to do the risk assessment, to do prevention, and so on and so forth. So that's basically a very, very, very short description of what we do. If you want more information on that, I don't want to go too much into detail. You can go to either securitymade.lu, as you see in the logo there, or you can go to cases.lu, as you see in the logo there. So let's move on and look at what cybersecurity actually means, shall we? Information security or cybersecurity is actually linked. Cybersecurity is what most people think of when we talk about information security. They always think of some information stored on a computer or on a mobile phone or anywhere else. Now you have to know that cybersecurity is part of information security, because information security includes a lot more. So we have paper, we have even like tables, tablets, boards, whiteboards, everything that you want is part, of course, of the information security. Information security as such also means the security if you are speaking aloud. So if you're in a restaurant, or you are on a phone, or you are talking to someone, that is all part of information security, because if you do that, if you talk in a restaurant, if you talk to your friends, if you talk to somebody on the phone and you raise your voice a little bit, people around you hear exactly what you're saying. And that is a big problem that we might have right now at home when you're talking too loud, that people at your home, like your spouse, your children, or even if you're like living in a community, they will actually hear maybe some trade secrets of your office. Just saying, it belongs to information security. I'm not saying that you should lock yourself into a bunker. We have politicians for that. But just saying, you should be aware of that in the future, especially if you're working from an hotel or something, because this presentation should help you not only get through this current crisis, but also help you in the teleworking in the future. So the main things, if we talk information security, the main things that are at stake basically are trust, customers, employer, and colleagues. If they lose the trust because something you did or something somebody did destroyed or leaked information, that is not necessarily a good thing. Because, for example, let's take a very, very normal example. If you work at a bank, right, and you have a certain amount of clients, you are talking over the phone, for example, you're sitting in a hotel, you talk over the phone, and you reveal the amount that they are investing in or something like that. Your client will definitely not be happy at the end. Or if you lose their, let's say, contact detail, if you have a construction company or something, you lose their contact detail, their architectural plans or whatever, that is all things that could happen. And if you lose the trust of your customers, or your employer or colleagues, to be honest, it is very, very difficult to regain that trust after a certain time. But then if you lose trust or lose data and so on and so forth, there's always the penalties, and there are legal penalties or economic penalties, and there are most people are familiar with the penalties, especially the financial operators or legal advisors. They know the penalties very well. But the main problems that we have is the trust, because if you lose the trust of your clients, a lot of people or a lot of potential customers might not come to you, and that is a big problem as such. And teleworking as such is a means to be more vulnerable than normal things. But this should just be a small introduction so that we are all basically on the same page, because if we have a lot of risks, we need to treat the risks, and the question comes then after a certain time, what is actually risk treatment, or what is actually a risk as such? Because we need to be able to know the risks before we are able to talk about them. And as I said, this is a small introduction, so you know a little bit what we mean when we speak of risks, of challenges like trust issues, or what is at stake basically. And that is something that is important to know, so you know going forward we are on the same page. So a risk. What is actually a risk? I mean, most of you probably have children or know of children or know people that have children. The idea is if they forget, for example, their key under the doormat, right? Then we would, of course, generate a vulnerability. That vulnerability that we just created of putting the key under the doormat so our child could come into the house when they forgot them and they come from school and you're at work, that vulnerability can also be taken advantage of by some kind of robber or whoever that can actually enter your house. And that is the threat as such. So there is somebody or something trying to exploit that vulnerability to get into your house. And then you, of course, have an impact, and that impact is that the robber has stolen all your money, all your goods, all your valuables. And that happens quite often if you leave the key under the doormat and somebody has seen you do that. But this should just be a small example to explain what actually a risk is, or how we understand a risk in information security. And that information security risk is actually a relationship between those three. So you have a vulnerability that is actually taken advantage of by some threat, and you have a certain impact. So this is basically a risk is built out of these. And then we have, of course, a couple of examples here, so you know more or less what a vulnerability, a threat, or an impact could represent, because a vulnerability can be many different things. For example, a weakness in some kind of defense mechanism, or if you have a wall around your house, the weakness could be that there would be like a small hole in the house, so somebody could actually get through that wall around your garden or something, right? An error is also a vulnerability. So if you don't have enough training, if you don't know how to do something, you might also have the problem that you do something by mistake that then creates a vulnerability. For example, you hit the wrong button, and as such, maybe you have activated a feature that was not supposed to be activated. There's also the intentional weakness or vulnerability as such, and the most famous example for that would be like the Trojan horse, for example. That would be like the intentional vulnerability as such. And then there's bad habits. People that have a certain amount of habits, they want to go. And that is interest. Yeah. So. And then, of course, there's threats that could be people, that could be natural disasters, that could be viruses, be it real viruses infecting people, or it could be viruses infecting computers, malware as in general term, could be that. So basically, everything that is impacting, let's say, the rest of your operation or your ability to work, or so on and so forth. And then, of course, the impact is basically usually financial, reputational, or sometimes even penal if you have, for example, a lot of money that you have to pay as a penalty. That happened, for example, to British Airways because they didn't do something very correctly a couple of years ago. When GDPR was running, they had like an old system running. They forgot to patch the system. They lost a lot of data, and that's something that is bad news for them. But anyways, that was like the short introduction that I wanted to give really quickly. That's like all the theory that we will more or less see for the theoretical part of what a risk is and so on and so forth, because I wanted to get you into the mindset that a risk is not necessarily always losing data. It could be somebody important gets sick, or you get sick and you cannot work, which means a lot of stuff will not work after you. So if you are like a key person in your company, which most people are, you not working slows down the whole operation also. So that is a problem that happens. And that is something that you should be aware of. But now to the interesting thing, because now we have the theory out of the way. Now we talk about teleworking and how to be secure on the teleworking part, because now we know what a risk is and so on. So let's move. This is the plan. And if there are any questions, I should remind you, if there are any questions, please post them in the chat so that we can actually go ahead and answer them during this live session. So if you find something that is not clear or something that I've missed or anything like that, please let us know in the description here or in the chat here. Just keep in mind that there's a slight delay, but that's fine. We will manage with that. So let's move to the phishing, then the passwords, then the devices, because devices are something really, really important, especially because at home, in situations like these, you go home, you take your laptop from the workplace with you at home, you start at home, but you have all these devices around your house, in your network, and so on and so forth. We have to think about those. The networks, of course, the cloud access, like with VPN, that is what we call also the cloud access, because your company might have some kind of storage solution, some kind of applications available, and that is usually accessed through VPN, I hope so. And then we go ahead and show you a couple of good practices to stay secure for the future teleworking as such. So let's go and start with the phishing. And that is something that I like very much because it's something that happens a lot these days. Everybody knows spam, that these are these weird emails that you get with blue pills or whatever it is, or breast enhancements or whatever it is. These are your typical spam emails. However, nowadays they actually concentrate more on political stuff than just the general great topics. So if something important happens, they will the attacker, if I say they, I mean the attacker will try to exploit that and connect to you, for example, or try to connect with you. For example, now, of course, we are at the time with the COVID-19 or the coronavirus, or however you want to call the virus. It has like 2 or 3 names. That is, of course, now a very, very important subject for an attacker to actually penetrate the defenses that you have set up at home. And that is where the phishing comes in, which is more try to get information from you. And then, of course, there's the emails that contain basically software to infect your system. And the first email that we found right now that has something like this is basically an email like the coronavirus latest updates. It is this email that you get supposedly from the Ministry of Health news in Portugal. Of course, we hid the email there, but it is not from Portugal, just saying. And it tells you to please see the attachment for the latest updates. Now you see that the latest updates is a file called at the bottom here. Well, maybe you can read it, maybe not, but there's written coronavirus latest update.dat. Sometimes it's PDF, sometimes it's an image file, a Word document, whatever it is. But there is a document, and that is some sort of malware virus, something that will infect your computer, and it gives the attacker access. Now the problem is, as soon as you click on something like this, you install it, and the attacker has the possibility to run his or her code, even with an antivirus in place. You would have a problem that you have access to the company network and the attacker has access to your computer, and so he can use your computer to get access to the company files or your private files, whatever you want to say. But that is how quickly this can happen, especially with these days where there's this corona stuff going on. And that is something very important. We also get a lot of emails. So this is another example that we got from also the coronavirus. This is another type because the first one that we showed you, the file was attached in the email. This one is actually, they ask you, and I left the emails addresses in here to show you an example. But this one wants you to download a file from some network. And here it says CDC Health Alert Network, and then the email address behind it does not actually closely reflect the CDC Health Alert Network. Now the problem is most email clients or email software only show you CDC Health Alert Network, and you'll be like, oh, this must be an official source that I can use, and this down there, the link in the description, so the link over here, down here, looks more or less correct because it says www.health.nd.gov and then some file somewhere. Now the question is that real or not? This one is not real, but you should never click on a link like this or on your own directly from the email address, but you should try and find the information elsewhere to be able to download it in another way. And just saying, for Luxembourg, there is a link called covid19.lu, I think it is. I'm just going to put it in the chat right now, just to be sure that you have it. If you want to know more about COVID-19, I'm just saying, you should be able to go there and have the necessary information without you needing to go and download some third-party link that you don't know exists or don't know if correct or not. That just as a side note, that's for Luxembourg, and I'm pretty sure any country that you are from, there is always an update on the current news, and you can actually see where it's from or what the actual state currently is. So you have all the necessary information. So please don't click on the links in these emails. That is very important. But we have another example that we received, which is also very interesting because that's the last type that we have had, and this is a phishing attempt, a real phishing attempt, where they want you to actually reply to a certain person with your data, right? So they say, please contact us. So that could be a very simple question of verifying that your email is actually active and that it actually works. And that is a big problem because you would answer, yeah, please help us, we need this, and then they can say on their list, okay, email confirmed, email is active, people read the email, so they can put it in a package and sell it for a certain amount of money. And that's usually how that works. And then there's a certain type of phishing that is actually even, this type of phishing or spam or whatever you want to call these emails are actually pretty simple to verify, because you can actually look at the email address and say, okay, this is not coherent, this does not make sense. And then you can actually see links which are a little bit weird and you don't want to click on them. So this is actually pretty easy to verify. A little harder is something called spearfishing. And it also comes from the phishing community as such, because if you fish normally, you have your hook and people bite on it and you pull them out, right? So it's basically, that's a normal phishing email as such that will happen. A spearfish is very, very targeted. So what a person does in a spearfishing attack, and that is very, very important for the look, or if you are at home to verify, to look into the emails more deeply, because a spearfishing attack, they will gather information first before they send it to you. So they will gather information from social media, they will actually even call you or your company or send emails to get the information needed, as they want to acquire as much as they possibly can. And then of course, the idea is to get your passwords, again, to get control of your device, to get control of your phone, to actually be able to use your devices or your credentials to get into the Office system. Or even they try and get really nasty and they ask you if you have TeamViewer installed, and they actually need to connect to your computer to fix something because they have noticed that something is not right with your computer. That is things that they usually do, but usually these are very, very targeted and they are very difficult to spot. But the same thing still applies. Look at the email very carefully. There is links. If somebody calls you, tell them, fine, I'll call you back. And use the phone number that you already know, not the one that they provide you with, but the one that you already know. So simple steps like this. Use what you know, not what they provide you with. Okay, so that is the basic tip that you can have here. And it is very crucial that you pay very much attention to what you receive right now, because there can be many, many examples of this. I mean, this was the Corona example, but we can also have an example of, I'm trying to work on this presentation, could you please correct it for me? And I'm sorry, I have to send it from my private email address because my company email address does not work at the moment. Stuff like that. You have to be very careful with all of these emails, especially if you are all alone, all by yourself, and you don't have a quick way to verify. It is the best way is to actually call your colleagues in IT or anyway to ask them the question. That is something very important to keep in mind, especially in these days. Then of course, with all of that, the idea is that they want a password or access credential. So the main important thing is, of course, and remains, of course, up to this day, the passwords. I mean, it is very well known that a password is basically part of your identity. So if you have a username, you have a password, well, you can actually, let's say, quote unquote, steal someone's identity. So you can actually identify as another person, and that is the main problem that we might face here. So if you lose your password or your username and password, it's basically giving somebody your phone and your wallet and say, have fun, here's the codes to the credit cards, do whatever you want. And that's basically what happens. Nowadays, thankfully, more and more people are aware of this, and they are actually trying to change all the passwords that they can. But often enough, when we buy a new, let's say, new phone, new camera, some toy that is connected to the internet, whatever, we forget to change the default passwords or the default access credentials. Even some companies, telecom companies, provide you with routers that have the standard passwords on there without any changing. So these are things that you have to be aware of and try to figure out how to change. Because if you are at home and you haven't changed your router password and somebody gets access to your router or something, that person can actually change anything they want, because the standard passwords, the default access passwords, are usually found in the manual, and they can be downloaded online, these manuals, right? So that is something really important, and you should always be aware of keeping these passwords safe and close to you. Because, and I've seen that sadly happening, as I said, telecom people not always change the default passwords. Some do, most don't. And let's go, just for completeness sake, talk about the password complexity. You have 12 characters that you now have to use as a minimum, because every year computers get more powerful, and it is important that you actually have passwords of a certain complexity. 12 characters is a minimum right now, that we can tell you you should use 12 characters as a minimum. You have at least one lowercase, one uppercase, a digit, and a special character would be great, if at all possible. And you should use one single password per service, and you should change it sometimes, or let's say regularly, to be quite honest, so that nobody would actually be able to use your password across multiple platforms. Why should you use a single password per service? Very, very easily. If that service loses your data or your credentials get leaked, which happens on a regular basis of many services, you don't have to change the password of every single service that you are using or having, right? So if you use the same password for your Facebook account that you use for your corporate email, that is not necessarily a good thing. Okay, so the question now is, how are you actually how are you actually remembering all your passwords, or how are you storing all your passwords? Because it seems impossible at first, but then there is people that have come up with a solution. These solutions are called password managers. Now, the problem with these password managers is that you have to have a good passphrase at the beginning, so a master password. So you need to remember one big and complicated password. Now, in that case, 12 characters, in my opinion, is way too little, because you have to have a longer passphrase. In that case, you can actually take a whole phrase and put him, or a whole sentence, and put him as password. Depends on how quick you type. But the idea is that you have a longer password as a master password. I have one that is way longer than 64 characters, just for me, because I'm crazy like that. But it's easy to do. You only need to remember one password, and that password manager now has a lot of possibilities of storing your passwords, of structuring the storage, and you can copy paste them into the services that you're using or that you want to use. But which password manager is the best? Well, let's put it this way. We use Dashlane, 1Password, Bitwarden, LastPass. There's so many. There's KeePass. There's hundreds of them. And most of them are great, especially if they come from a big company with a good name, because Norton also has passwords managers. They all have password managers depending. So they all have different password managers, and they are all okay to use. It's just a matter of, does that password manager do what you want, or doesn't it do what you need? That's the question. I mean, Some are cloud-based, some are local, some you have to copy paste everything left and right. It depends on what your choice is and what you want to do. There's a lot of them out there. Just go ahead and check them out. There's not really that many bad ones. So most of them anyways that you find nowadays are the good ones. So don't worry about that too much. But these passwords, they are usually on devices. Now the problem is with the devices is, the question is who can access your devices? I mean, especially if you do home office or teleworking, whatever it is. If you do teleworking, you take your laptop, you take your phone with you, usually, or your tablet or whatever it is that you want to work with. So when you sit at home and you have the tablet there, who can actually access your work system? Who can actually access your work files, your work data? What has happened already, and that's something really funny, and that's why I'm saying who can access this. I have seen cats writing emails. I have seen cats writing data into databases because people actually forgot to lock their screen when they left them unattended. So they left their computer there, they went to the bathroom at home, and when they came back, the cat was actually lying on the laptop. And the email was gone. So you had a weird email. But these are the funny things. The not so funny things are if you have your laptop standing there, your phone that's not water resistant there, you have your cup of coffee next to your laptop, and the cat turns around, or whatever it is, or your child, or whatever it is, turns around, touches the cup falls onto your laptop, onto your computer, and all your information is gone. All your computer is completely broken because it got wet. And that is actually something that I don't think is a good idea to leave happen. So you should not always lock your computer when unattended, but you should also be very, very, very careful with the data you have on there and how to protect it. So you need backups and so, but we will get to that in a short bit. The other thing is, if you're on teleworking, who can see your screen? That is a big question. Because if you are somewhere and that somebody else can look over your shoulder and look at your screen, for example, if you're in a train, if you're on a plane, if you're in a hotel, if you're in the lobby or something, in a restaurant, and you take your laptop out or your tablet out or your phone out, and you are looking at the information on that, be careful of whoever is watching, because that also is a big information leak that you should not take lightly. So you need to be very careful about that. Then, of course, if we talk devices like that, we assume right now that you have the latest updates installed, that you have an antivirus running, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, is a good thing to know. Also for antivirus, before you ask the question, it doesn't really matter which antivirus you're using because most of them are really great. Even the free ones nowadays are really, really good. For Windows, there's even one built in that you could use if it's your private system. But if it's a company laptop or company device, usually you have an antivirus system already installed that is managed by the company, so you should not worry. And if you have to worry, that means please let the IT department know to put antivirus software on the computer. There's many great ones out there. There's no worries about that, so you are totally fine choosing almost any one that there is out there. Okay, so that is on the subject of devices right now. Then, of course, we have networks. I mean, still, if you have any questions to whatever I'm saying, please post them in the comments so we can actually answer them. We will be happy to do that. But then we move towards networks. And that is something also very, very important. We had that happen yesterday. We had a conference call, and then suddenly one of the participants disconnected from the conference call, and we didn't know why. And when that person came back, he said, well, he had to reconnect to the other network because he didn't notice that he was on the neighbor's network, which means that the neighbor's network was not really well protected, was it? But that was like the funny story about it. But if you are in a hotel or somewhere somehow, are you sure that the network that you see is actually the correct network? Because if you want to connect to Wi-Fi network, everybody knows that if they are in a hotel, or even in Luxembourg, we have this thing called hot city, and it's like written hot city, but are you sure that it's actually the right network? That's the question. Because you can create a network, a wireless network with your phone, if you will, like a hotspot, that has exactly the same name as the network you're currently sitting next to. The only difference is that that person that created the network can read everything that you are sending back and forth and with whom you're communicating. And for that reason, if you are somewhere, you should actually use the necessary protection, to which we're coming soon. But you have to be careful when you use your network, especially your own network. Be sure, as I mentioned before with the Fritzbox is interesting in that respect, be sure that you have changed the default password. Also be sure that you have a very good password on your Wi-Fi. And also please be sure that your password is, or your encryption setting is, the strongest one that you can actually use. So everything that you can do to prevent somebody else from creating a fake network in your neighborhood when you're at home, or in the hotel when you're at the hotel, or wherever you will be sure that you do not connect automatically to unprotected networks. Be sure that you have your credentials set correctly so that you are sure that it's the right network. And then, of course, use a VPN, but we will get to that in a second. Then the reason for the whole thing is, of course, come on. Reason, of course, is, yes, that if you don't have a very secure network, or you don't know who the network belongs to, the easiest thing to do is actually have a VPN running. A VPN is a virtual private network, and a virtual private network is actually something very interesting. Now, in essence, what a virtual private network does is basically hiding your transactions, basically, from the hotel wireless, for example, or the fake wireless, whatever, and it connects in an encrypted manner to your company, if your company is a company VPN, or to your private house if you have a private VPN. You could actually imagine this in the following way. You are sitting the internet works basically like houses, right? So if you want to go somewhere, if you want to go to a web page, you want to go to that web page. So you can imagine you go outside of your house, you go over the street, you go to the other house, the shop, to wherever you want to go, collect the information that you need, and go back to your house, right? So that's basically how a normal network could be visualized. And a VPN as such would be, you have your office down the street, and you have somebody, of course, watching your house, because everybody watches everybody on the internet. But if you use a VPN, for example, you could have a direct tunnel between your house and your office. So if you need files from the office, they know that you are moving through a tunnel, but they don't know what information you are getting or where you're getting it really from. So basically that's what happens. So you have a small tunnel, private tunnel, quote unquote private tunnel, that you move back and forth from. That's like very simply explained, and the detail is different, of course, but as a simple explanation, this should be it. Because if you don't use a VPN and you're trying to access a lot of data, or you copied all the data onto your device, you have, of course, the big problem that the more data you have, the more can be stolen, the more can be lost, right? So that is a big problem that you might face. So every information that you're using should be backed up. They should not necessarily be backed up at your house, because you're not necessarily having the infrastructure to back up everything from your company. But the most important thing here is that you have a backup solution in place, especially in the company, that you can actually connect to through the secure VPN connection and automatically do that. Then, of course, that will also solve the problem. For example, if you have the cat at home that kicks the cup of coffee over your laptop, and then the whole laptop will break or will have a short, and you can actually fix it by having a backup. So if your laptop breaks, you can get another laptop in place and tell your cat never to walk over your laptop again. And that's why we say you can have a problem any day, so please back up often. I know the backup stuff is a little bit tricky, and most people I know don't back up until they lose all their data, and then they back up like every 20 minutes. That's usually what happens. Everybody does that. Happened to me personally also, and that's ever since then, everything that's important to me will have at least 1 or 2 backups somewhere. But that's the normal course of action. Still, I urge you, if it has never happened to you that you lost your data, awesome, please back them up so it will never happen. Also, a backup like this will have an advantage if your computer gets infected with something because you got an email, you clicked on a file, you opened something and it destroyed your whole computer. You might still have the backup available at the backup location, so that is something important, just as a general information. Now the question also is, how long should you be connected to your VPN? I mean, every time you're working with the device, you should be connected. But if you leave your device unattended, please disconnect from the VPN network. Because if you leave the connection open, somebody else could come and steal information from, let's say, from your system, from your files from the server, from the company, because you're still connected. And that's why you should always disconnect. And that's why we say never stay connected the whole day, because you are taking a lunch break, hopefully, or you are going out to get some groceries maybe in the afternoon. Don't be connected to the VPN, or don't leave your computer turned on actually. When you leave, you should actually have it turned off. And also, as we said before, every connection always comes back to some kind of authentication, and that needs a very strong password or some kind of security card that you need to be able to connect. Because if you use a bad password, a simple password, it is actually very easy to crack. Also, if you do have a card or something secure in place to connect yourself to something, or to your company network, or to your web page, or to your applications, or wherever you are, like for example the banking for the private, not for the professional use, or also for the professional use, you have a token or a card. Please be aware of where you put that, because if you don't put that in a correct place, if you don't keep it safe, again, we are at the same point of just handing out everything they want. So you can give them a credit card plus the PIN number at the same time. And that is something that we need to be aware of. So now let's go and have a small look at what we can actually do to protect yourself. Because there are many tips and tricks that you can actually use to protect yourself against most of these cases. Some I already told. For example, never click on any link on an email that you don't know, especially if it comes from a bank or somebody that wants you to download something. It is definitely better to go to that service yourself. For example, your cloud storage, your web application. But you should always continue to be aware of whatever happens, right? So you should always be communicating. You should always check with your colleagues, with IT, with the IT service. You should check with those people at first. Every time you receive something and you're not sure, please call them up. Please communicate with them. Or if you send something to someone, tell them beforehand via phone, via messaging service. I don't know what you use inside your company or what you use privately. Send them, I will send you an email with that file. It will be at that location, don't worry. Or you could just not do it, and the other person, if she feels insecure, she will call you up or she will message you somehow and ask you, are you sure it's from you or something like that? Are you sure that you have sent this? Did you really wanted to send this information to me, and so on and so forth? That is something that you should always be aware of. The other thing is, if you have clicked on something that you're not quite sure of, or you don't know if it was correct or not, if you feel insecure, and some administrators might kill me, but it is still better to call one too many times than not enough. Because the problem is, if you do not call your IT service, you don't communicate with the IT service, you will definitely have the problem that if something happens, you lose a lot of time and a lot of money from the company to restore everything, if it can be restored. Now, of course, if something really strange happens, well, then you can always contact your local cybersecurity organizations. For example, as we have in Luxembourg, we have circle.lu or cases.lu in case you want to have more information on cybersecurity, or in case a fire actually started and you need assistance. You can always contact circle.lu or cases.lu if you want more information about different topics. That is always a possibility. But we don't stop here. We want to remind you again that you should use very complex passwords and change them regularly. And you can definitely use a password manager. If you don't have a password manager on your in your office yet, that could be something that you suggest, because if you have a password manager in your office, it will be also easy to pass around the passwords using your company password manager instead of using email for that. If you want to use email for that, there are encryption methods that work. I'm not going into detail, but you could use something like PGP, or GPG is the open source variant for it. That is encrypting your emails on a very high level, on a very good level, and that helps you send information via email, but encrypted so nobody could read that. There are different kinds of implementation, but you have to see with your company what would fit and what wouldn't. But I still suggest you look into that, which is GPG or PGP as such, but you can have that. But it still comes down to complex password, because that's what GPG and PGP is. It's like a public-private key encryption, and it could also be used symmetrically. But anyways, that is too complicated for now. You can use that if you want, if you have no other choice than sending emails because you don't have other communication system in place. You can have something like a PGP or GPG server running, and everybody in your company could have something like this installed, and you can communicate together with that. Anyways, all these steps are easy to do anyways. You should always change the default access configurations, especially at home now, because let's face it, if you are now taking teleworking at home, and I mentioned it at the beginning very briefly, if you do teleworking at home, so home office if you will, you should have your devices very well protected that you have in your home network, because you're using your home network to connect to your company's network right now. So if you have weird things in there like toys, connected toys, or your IP cameras, or things like that, if you have that in your network, be sure to protect them correctly with a good password, with a custom password, not the one provided by a factory, because you don't want anyone else to get into your network and snoop around. Also, if you use IP cameras, be careful to not sit in front of such a camera when you're doing your work. It seems so normal, but we have seen cases where people were actually working on something rather, let's say, confidential, and they had their IP camera pointed straight at their screen. So that was something that was very interesting as well. Avoid connecting to unknown networks. That is something that we always say, and people say, yes, we know, but what is an unknown network? And an unknown network is every network that you're not sure of. So that could be the hot city, which personally I'm not really sure of. Apparently it's a very good network. I never used it so far, so to me it is just known by name. If you're at some hotel that you're not quite sure that's the right network, you can always ask the hotel manager or somebody at the hotel reception area to ask them if that is the correct hotel network, and you can connect to it. And these are tips that you can actually go ahead and find that. If you find a free Wi-Fi somewhere that you don't know, that is not advertised necessarily correctly, don't actually use it. Use use the stuff that you know to be sure that you don't leak information accidentally. Or if you have to connect through a network, use something like a VPN. Always keep your devices with you. Seems also very, very simple. I mean, if you're at home, I don't want you to go and take your laptop from the couch with you to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the dining table. It's not necessarily a good idea. It's not the best idea to do. You can leave your laptop somewhere, but lock the screen and be sure that it is well enough protected so that no animals, no kids, nobody could actually knock it about so that it actually breaks. That is the idea behind it. But if you are outside, please be sure to always take it with them. Don't leave them somewhere lying in the hotel. Don't leave them somewhere lying in a conference room. Always take them with you, because you don't know where it has been before. And also, anyways, if you have a device like that, you should always encrypt it if you take it outside of the company. And I hope that your company is already doing that. But for your personal laptops, you could actually use something like VeraCrypt, for example. I think someone can actually post a link in the chat right now if you want to know more about that. That could be like a program that you use for your private computer, that you can install on your private computer, for example, and that will actually encrypt it very, very strongly. And it has a great tutorial on how to do it. So every information that's stored on that computer will not be accessible by somebody finding your computer or stealing your computer, or whatever it is. That is always something important. Please verify that you have something like that in effect on your computers that you take out from your company, especially from teleworking. I mean, now it's a little bit late, especially if you're in quarantine, because running back and getting an encrypted device is a little bit tough, but nobody is allowed out, so nobody is stealing stuff anyways at this point, so you'll be fine for now. But keep in mind for future teleworking applications that you should encrypt your devices when you take them out. That is just an additional idea. And of course, every time, only download the data that you need and save the data when you're done back, when you've modified it, back to the centralized storage that you have, or make a backup of it if it's your private stuff, just to be sure that you will have access to your data in case of your machine breaks. Also, the less data you take with you, and if it is encrypted, you have the big chance of not losing much. Because sometimes, depending on the country you would visit, later on when you're allowed to travel again, you might need to provide them with the password to decrypt your computer. And the less data you have on there, the better it is for you, if you don't want anyone to have all the data that you have actually worked on. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Then, of course, your work data should be saved on your company's cloud and your company's storage. Don't use your private cloud system to do backup of your company data, because there are different rules in place. There are different things in place that you have to respect. You have to be careful with where you save your data, because sometimes some providers are actually taking the right, or actually they tell you that they have the right to do with your data more or less what they want. So they can analyze it, they can use it for promotional purposes, they can show them to other people. So that's basically something you have to keep in mind. And if you have a company storage, use that company storage to do the backups. Never use private storage to do company backups. That's just as a side note. So that's why I wanted to say use the company storage here. Connect to services only when needed. What I mean by that is you have to be careful not to connect to everything as soon as you log in, right? But only to the things that you're actually using. Again, same reason, the more places you are connected to, if somebody gets access to your device, that person can actually go ahead and use all the services that they want. Again, if you are in a conference, if you are on a hotel, if you are at home, who has access to your computer? Is it your spouse? Is it your children? Do you have access to a computer the whole time? Or is your computer a shared computer, and so on and so forth? These are things that you need to keep in mind, because these connect to service only when needed applies to the private side as well as the professional side. This is just as a tip and as a side note. If you don't need the service anymore, log yourself out and you will be fine, and nobody will take your data or use your name to post something. Because simple as a Facebook post could actually destroy a lot of people very quickly. Because if you receive a message, for example, from one of your best friends over Facebook, you are very very likely, to click on that link instead of being cautious than if somebody unknown would send you something. So if you leave yourself connected to these services, you might have a problem with that. And then finally, of course, your company probably has some guidelines and some rules in place that will help you respect the company security when at home or when you're teleworking. That is something that's important to note and something to remember when you are actually doing teleworking. We can give you a lot of tips on what to pay attention to, but your company's rules and guidelines need to be followed as well. Because sometimes, and that's also why we don't give concrete examples on how to configure your system in this, because every company is different, every tool is different, and we just wanted to give you a couple of tips to be careful what to do and what not to do, especially if your company's rules imply or implement a very strict bring your own device rule, and you are now at home and you want to work for your company and you only have your private computer with you, you need to be careful to respect or continuously respect these rules. And that also comes with when you do teleworking and you have your phone with you abroad, be careful not to lose it. These are things that are usually in the company rules and guidelines that you should be aware of. Great, so that was more or less really a quick tour through it. I hope this helped a little bit. I hope that you found something useful and that you could actually implement the things or that you can implement the things needed. Are there any additional questions that are now available or that you have that you want to ask us right now? Because we can still answer them. We are still available for some time. Other than that, you can go ahead and send us a message, info@cases.lu, if you want more information, or if you want to know if something is fishy or not. You can transfer that to info@cases.lu, or you can actually send it to info@circle.lu, because they are the ones doing the analysis, and they are the ones that will take care of the more technical parts of infections and so on and so forth, because the Circle stands for Computer Incident Response Center Luxembourg. So that's a computer emergency response team. So they are very well versed, let's say, in malware and all these things. And the cases.lu is more the awareness raising and risk assessment and so on and so forth. So if you are willing, for example, for some reason, to test your knowledge basically on the general topics of cybersecurity, the higher ones, or you want to test it for your company because you know your company a little bit and you have a little bit of time to do that, you can head over to startup.cases.lu. I'm just going to put a link really quickly in this chat room. You should be able to do some kind of self-assessment, and you will be able to have some kind of recommendations happening afterwards, so you know more or less where you are at and what you should do to remain secure at this point. I mean, I hope that was good. If there are no further questions, I think we would be done. And I thank you very much for listening.